I'm Kat.
And I'm Ranty, and together we host the Almost Unbelievable Paranormal Podcast.
On our show, we bring in guests who tell us of their own paranormal experiences, and I try and find a scientific reason as to the cause of the event.
Yeah, Kat's is a skeptic, and I'm anything but. I kind of think maybe because he's bald.
Oi!
Well, I've experienced many things firsthand, strange and unexplained, so I know these events are real, and know the answers lie within the paranormal.
And well, I'm just waiting for that one story to come along and really blow it out the park for me. Either that or perhaps experience something unexplained firsthand myself. So any ghosts out there, you know where to come.
Yep, just be careful what you ask for though, Kat.
Oh, I'm not scared.
Well, after the guest has told their story, we thank them for the time, and we butt heads trying to come to some kind of consensus on what we thought of the story.
We're currently trying to keep our podcast around about 30 minutes in length as well, so not to bore you to death.
Yep, that's our format. Anything from UFOs, werewolves, aliens, monsters, demons, or ghosts. If you have a tale to tell us, we're all ears.
And Ranty has big ears.
Oi!
But that's it, really. We are fun, we're entertaining, and we want to bring you the best podcast we can. So you return time and time again.
Thank you for your time, everybody.
See you in the next one.
See you in the next one. In a world where anything is possible, in a world where the normal and the paranormal reside, Almost Unbelievable brings to you the stories you want to hear, but fear to hear. Join us in the pit. You have joined the Almost Unbelievable Paranormal Podcast with Cats. I'm Ranty. Are you there, Cats?
I am here, and as always, I've got a little bit of a question for you. Can you tell me what a little bastard is?
Well, I've had several encounters with little bastards in my time, but as for saying where they came from, I really couldn't tell you, Cats. You're going to have to tell me. Go ahead.
Well, Little Bastard was a nickname given to James Dean's car, a Porsche. Are you familiar with the stories surrounding James Dean's death? It's quite a spooky one, full of coincidence.
I'm not actually, but are you telling me that it's a car and not a person?
I certainly am. Yeah, Little Bastard doesn't refer to a person, so anyone at home, please don't be offended. Little Bastard is a nickname given to James Dean's Porsche, which he died in, and the story is quite fascinating. Shall we begin with the story?
I'm all ears, Cats.
So the story begins when James Dean buys his car and he shows it to his good friend, actor Alec Guinness from the Star Wars films. And Alec Guinness, upon taking a look at the car, said, if you're going to drive that, you better be careful because you'll be dead within a week. And within a week, obviously, Ranty, what do we think had happened?
Well, saying it like that, I would assume that he's probably dead.
Dead in a car crash, indeed. And the sad story doesn't stop there. George Barris was the name of the man who customised the car for James Dean. And after the crash, he was responsible for putting it onto the trailer and removing it and stripping it for parts. But unfortunately, he slipped off the trailer that the car was on, landing on a mechanic and shattering the leg of the mechanic. Quite the coincidence, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
But it doesn't stop there. Because once he had stripped the car for the parts, he sold some of those parts to two gentlemen going by the name of Troy McHenry and William Eschrid. Both of these gentlemen placed some of those car parts into their own cars, and within just a matter of a few weeks, both had a car crash, one which unfortunately killed Troy McHenry, and the other one which put William Eschrid in a very serious state in hospital. Do we think that's the end of the coincidences?
Well, I think at this point, we're getting to the realms of this is spooky. Go ahead, I think this sounds like there's more, Cats.
There is. Another gentleman bought two of the tyres, and while he was driving the car, both of the tyres at exactly the same time burst, causing yet another car crash. Two thieves also tried to steal parts of the car while it was on display somewhere, and one of the thieves tore up all the muscles in his own arm, trying and failing to steal the steering wheel. If that wasn't enough, the car was then put on show by the California Highway Patrol in a garage, and the garage itself set on fire. Well, almost everything in the garage was destroyed apart from the car itself, which was then used as a display tool. And while the car was being used on display in a school, it fell off its display stand and crushed the hip of a child. Do you want to know how this story ends?
Well, I hope they blew it up.
The car was destroyed to prevent it doing any more damage to any other people. So legendary was the curse of that car. Do you believe in curses, Ranty? I think this is the point I'm trying to get to with this story. Do you believe objects can be cursed?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think from the original podcast we did, podcast number 1, The Shadow Demon, I think I go into a little bit of a story there about what happened with the totem pole. So for me personally, having experienced something like that, I can attest personally to objects being possessed in some way.
But I'm really excited about today's guest. He is an ultra scientifically minded skeptic who runs the very successful YouTube channel FTFE. Please look him out and you'll see him debunking all sorts of claims on that channel. But he's here now with a claim of his own. And Ranty, I will let you introduce him.
Thanks, Cats. And yes, we are joined by FTFE. How in the world are you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me on. Really happy to be here. Can I just say that I think you and Ranty might be one of the best duos on the internet, so please don't stop doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, regular listeners to our podcast will also know the answer to this question, and I'm so hoping, Ranty, you still remember it. But can you now tell me what a little bastard is?
Yeah, of course I can. Yeah, it was James Dean's car.
And if you remember from that podcast, James Dean's car was the centre of the most unlikely sequence of tragic events that led many people to believing it was cursed, and eventually the car was destroyed. Are you familiar of any other cars that are considered to be cursed?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of cars that have been cursed, absolutely. But I've never told anybody about it. But I'm sure you have a very good story to tell us.
I certainly do. Now, I'm looking at a picture of a car here that has the license plate A111118. Why is that license plate significant, do you think? 111118. Why is that number significant?
I have absolutely no idea.
Well, if you turn that into a date, 111118, that is the 11th of the 11th, 18 or 1918, which was Armistice Day, the day that World War I ended. Now, whose license plate could that possibly be? Well, that is the license plate of the brand new car driven by Franz Ferdinand, whose assassination directly led to the beginning of World War I, almost as if the car itself was trying to predict what was going to happen in the future. Now, how did his assassination come about? Well, he was driving his brand new car, which suddenly stalled outside a cafe, where the person who assassinated him took the opportunity, that perfect timing, to walk outside the cafe and shoot him dead. Which, to me, those are two quite strong coincidences. What do you think?
Definitely, and I'm blown away by the fact that that registration number was the day of the armistice, but all right, okay, carry on.
So out of that mess, obviously, we had an assassination. It's led to the World War. It was horrendous. The car survived the assassination attempt completely unscathed. So it obviously went on to new owners. Now, the first person to acquire the car was an Austrian general named Potiorek, and I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. Now, he apparently became insane while he was driving the car and ended up having to live out his years in a mental asylum. Was that the end of the story?
Well, I'm getting a strange deja vu here, so I'm going to say no.
Well, it wasn't the end of the story. The car survived, and it was passed to another German military officer who drove the car down a country road and encountered two peasants who walked out in front of him. So he swerved not to kill the peasants. Unfortunately, he didn't swerve well enough, and he did kill the peasants, but he swerved just enough to then crash the car into a tree, killing himself.
Ouch.
Yeah, not the end of it, though, because then the car...
Are you telling me it survived?
The car was repaired, and after that it was passed to the governor of Yugoslavia, who apparently just had no end of bad luck with it. He was involved in 4 separate accidents, losing an arm in one of them. And the governor would often be heard to publicly say that his car was cursed. I don't know how much of the past he knew about it, but he decided at one point to get rid of it. The only person he could then get rid of it from was someone who dealt in... Nobody wanted it, so he managed to get it to an automobile share shop that just traded any old junk. And the next owner there flipped over the car and was crushed to death underneath it. before it was bought by a Swiss. I can't believe this is still going on. Before it was bought by a Swiss race car driver who also killed himself by flipping. I don't know why I'm laughing. Killed himself by flipping the car and ended up being crushed underneath it. Now, listen, anyone can Google this. This car is still on show today, and the story doesn't end there. But I feel I'm in danger if I keep talking about the history of this car, of people thinking I'm just making this up. So, can cars be cursed? I don't know, but that is one hell of a coincidence.
Well, this kind of story reminds me of why you don't like flying, because it's quite possible that these contraptions can definitely be cursed. I mean, James Dean and then this. I mean, this is just too much. Yes, so our guest today is called Trucky, and she has, as I say, she's had two stories. Kat's has already told you what we're going to do with the first one, but the second one is something to do with some kind of astral projection, so I believe. But I'm going to let Trucky tell you this story. I'm going to sit back, and are you there, Trucky?
Well, Zach has an incredible story to tell us. Him and his wife, believe it or not, now, I don't know whether it's true or not, but they believe that they can meditate to the point where they can actually visualize other beings in different universes, in different worlds, and go there, converse with them, be sometimes even fed information that should help advance our technological abilities. How astonishing is that?
Well, it is. Everyone who's listening is interested in this. If you look up Many Worlds interpretation of the double slit experiment, there's loads out there on the internet. It's really fascinating. But ultimately, the idea of having separate realities is fascinating. And I do believe today's guest has a story that may or may not be linked to what I've just said.
Oh, today's guest. I have to say, this is the most interesting story I've heard to date. And we have recorded a lot of backstories too. We've got a lot of podcasts ready to go. And I have to say, like I say, this one really knocked my socks off. So I cannot wait to introduce today's guest. And today's guest is going to tell us a glitch in the matrix style type event, kind of parallel worldy kind of event. And she has some evidence to go along with that too. So I just cannot wait for you to hear this story. Our guest today is called Alex. Are you there, Alex?
I am here.
Now, I think almost everybody would agree with you on what a ghost is, but it turns out that defining a demon is a little bit harder, and it does depend on where you come from in the world and what your religious beliefs are. For example, Christians in the West believe that demons were angels that went bad, whereas Hindus in the East believe that demons are beings called asuras, which means any supernatural being at all that was good or bad. And there's a whole range of different definitions historically as well. The Greeks defined demons in a different way to modern day people, etc. It all becomes very interesting and complex. But I do believe that today's guest might have a little bit of experience in this area and can shed some light onto it, because don't they have experience with demons, Ranty? But today's guest may just try and convince us otherwise, because he's going to tell us a story about some cursed human bones. And Ranty, I'm going to pass back to you so you can introduce him. I'm doing very well, and I am massively looking forward to this story. Is it going to be a spooky one? Is it going to be a UFO-based one? Give me a clue.
Well, today's guest is called Heidi, and Heidi has the most tremendous story. In fact, we have photographic images along with a video. And what's interesting is that the photographic images are from one CCTV camera and the video is from another. So on two separate days too. And it's very interesting, very clear. These images appear to show a ghost. And that sounds really weird to say, but this ghost also has humanoid proportions with arms, legs, head and body, and it's walking, and yet it's walking on snow, and it doesn't leave any footprints. It's also walking, but it's see-through, and we definitely have those images. So I can't wait to introduce today's guest, but I have a feeling today, Katz, that you've got a bit of a trivia question for me before we start. Is that right?
Oh, well, today I've got a little memory test for you. I'm going to read out one of the most famous interviews that anybody involved in the paranormal world will have heard. I don't want to see if you can recognize it. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm all ears.
Okay, let's go. Here we are. The interview sounded a little bit like this. The armchair came off the floor by merely half an inch, I should say, and I saw it slide off to the right about 3.5 to 4 feet before it came to rest. I checked to see whether or not it could possibly have slid along the floor. I even placed a marble on the floor to see whether the marble would go in the same direction as the chair, and it didn't. I didn't know what could have been the cause, and I checked for wires, I checked for anything under the cushions of the chair, and I just couldn't find any explanation at all. Where have I got that from?
Well, when I was a child, we were told a story, or at least I think my mother told me a story. I think I was a child anyway, I have to have been quite young. And that sounds to me very reminiscent of a story that I heard a long time ago, like I said, from the Enfield haunting. Would I be correct there?
Well, you'd be right on one of those accounts, but I've got to say, Ranty, on this podcast so far, we've heard some far-fetched stories, but the story that you were ever young has to be the most far-fetched of all of them.
Hey, listen, I still feel like I'm 5 years old. What can I say?
Anyway, so moving. Yes, it is the Enfield haunting.
Is telling me this story, and she just freezes mid-sentence, and her eyes are like trained out, like through the windshield. So I look where she's looking, and there's a dude standing like at the end of the cul-de-sac, like just kind of like between two houses, and he's just super tall, super tall, and he's like tilted at like a weird angle, and he's got just like these kind of like this lanky figure, really skinny figure. And so I'm staring, and neither of us are talking. So we stare for about like, I want to say like 15-20 seconds. We're staring at this dude, just like neither of us saying a word. And then he starts kind of like limping towards us, like in like a very like, he's like dragging one foot behind him. Like it's weird. Like it's just really unsettling to look at. And so like we're still just kind of staring. And then as he gets closer, I turn on my brights to get a better look at him. And it's still like a good distance, but I up the light. And this dude, I mean, he's still at a good ways away, but he freezes. And in that moment that he froze, this dude is bald. He's super pale, like just white. And he's in a hospital gown. And he's like abnormal. Like it is like the proportions were not normal. Like it was, it sounds like I'm describing a dream I had every time I tell this story. It was the freakiest thing I've ever seen. So he freezes in the lights, and and he sits there for about 5 seconds, and we're still not saying anything. And then he like doubles his speed and is like urgently limping towards us. It looked like a zombie from a movie. Like he is cooking. He is trying to get to our car.
We have a guest standing by who's going to tell us a poltergeist / shadow demon story that's going to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
She said that she was in her room. She was asleep, and she woke up. She said, I was able to move. She said, I know it's not sleep paralysis, Mom, because I could move. And I said, okay, well, what? And she said, well, I looked over in the corner of my room, and I saw this black looking almost like a female figure with these black spikes coming off the top of her head and a very long snake-like tongue coming from her mouth, almost hissing at me, is what she was saying. And she said, at first I wasn't really afraid, but then she walked toward me and she put her one hand on the top of my jaw and the one on another on the bottom, and she opened my mouth and she tried to climb inside my mouth.
And he's like, yeah, no, it was like about 6 feet tall or taller. And I'm like, yes. Dark, yes. It was wearing like a trench coat type of thing. And I'm like, yes, I saw that. And he's like, did you see the eyes? And I'm like, yeah. They were like red or something like that. And he's like, yeah, they were like glowing. And I'm like, yeah, but I didn't see a hat. And he's like, I swear there was a hat. And I was like, okay, well, I've read enough about the freaking Hat Man. And, you know, apparently the Hat Man is a bad entity or whatever, and he usually shows up when something bad is going to happen. One of the nights, he goes to sleep, whatever, and I'm sleeping, but I'm still like sort of awake. And this man starts seizing in his sleep, like a full-on seizure, like eyes rolled up to the back of his head, and he's having a seizure. I had never seen him like that, so I freak out. And I just turn him to his side, and I'm like, oh my God, he's having a seizure. So I just turn him to his side, and I stay there waiting for the seizure to be gone. It takes him like a little bit to come to. And whenever he starts seizing and I just see him normal again, I shake him and I'm like, hey, are you okay? And he wakes up and he's like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, why? And I'm like, what just happened? And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, you were seizing or you were shaking? And he's like, I was having this dream. And I'm like, you were having a dream? And he's like, yes. In the dream, I was seeing that figure that we saw. And I'm like, oh, yeah? And he's like, yeah. And in the dream, it was like getting really close to me. And I was actually like really scared. And I don't know, like one thing led to another. And you're talking to some like lady to do like an exorcism or a cleanse in the apartment or something like that. And once the cleanse starts, that's when I woke up. But in reality, he didn't wake up. He just started seizing.
As I was about 3/4 through the round, I started noticing that the lights, the lampposts that I was going past, the lights would turn off as I got past them. I went past a light and it went off, and I felt pressure over my body and like static electricity on every part of my body. And it made me feel really nauseous and slightly dizzy. And then when I looked up, I wasn't in the same place anymore. It was still the street that I was on, but everything looked almost like a pastel drawing. Nothing was quite right. It was there wasn't really any buildings there, but there were shapes that maybe could be buildings. And I kind of blinked my eyes a few times, rubbed my eyes, thought maybe I just felt a bit weird, but no, it was still there. And then there was what appeared to be people or some kind of life forms, and they seemed agitated that I was there and were moving towards me. And I freaked out and I turned around and I ran.
I mean, what she said, like, just my blood kind of ran cold. And she's a young girl. She was like, I think 15 at the time. And she said, do you ever see something? Like, do you ever see something when you're trying to sleep at the beach house? And I'm like, oh no.
And inside, I saw these three beings. They were very tall. They had very long necks. They almost had like a praying mantis's shaped head. It was very rounded, bulbous around like where the head, like the cranial area is, like towards the back. They had large almond-shaped black eyes, very pointed small chins. They were wearing these like long flowing robes, like silver, like white and gold. And they had like these weird shoulder things, like at the ends, like little like silvery balls. I'm not sure what they were wearing. It was very weird. But they were standing behind like this, or they were standing in front of this craft. It almost looked like a Pringles chip. You know how it kind of has the flared sides, but it was very flat and it had like the center like bulbed area, kind of like a half raised oval. You just plop it right in the middle of a Pringles chip. It was like silvery, metallic. It was very shiny, very reflective. And at one point, I wanted to go into this hole. I wanted to go to where they were at. I was just in awe. I wanted to go there.
But now is the time when me and Ranty retire back into the pit and we have a think about what we can make of your story. So Ranty, I need a bit of time to piece this together. I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Well, what do I think? I've already exuberated enthusiasm throughout this podcast because it's such a great story. The fact that everything to me is so convincing. The fact that Alex has a witness to this, somebody that was there with her who experienced the same thing, the same feelings of unease, the same need to get out of the house and go for a walk. The fact that the area that she lives in is just very well populated, very active on a night, and yet on this particular night it was deathly silent. There was no noise coming from anywhere, no animals, nothing like that. The eeriness of this made both of the witnesses so terrified that they just needed to go for a walk. And then everything that they saw on this walk was just different. The fence panels, the Halloween toy, the car chase with cars going at incredible speeds that you just wouldn't expect to have that kind of technology here today. The fact that they saw a woman disappear with a dog, and then the lady walked through that area that the woman disappeared from and then felt incredibly sick immediately afterwards. The fact that everything that changed on that night stayed changed. And more importantly, the car key that she was given, the battered old car key with the backstory of having been sold the car from a car dealer who had remarked, and both of them had remarked, about how battered the car key was, to suddenly return home and find a brand spanking new car key that she could actually hold and touch, something that it just couldn't happen. This story to me is just incredible. And she's also kindly sent me images. She sent me images of the fence panel. She sent me images of her car key. And I have to say, you can definitely see where these things have been replaced. You know, it's as simple as that. You can see that there is a new car key. You can see that there is a new fence panel. Now, I suppose at the end of the day, it all comes down to the credibility of the guest. And if you listen to the story and you listen to how she tells the story, you can feel the fear in her voice. You can feel that she's experiencing this. To me, this is the most compelling story I've heard up to date, with evidence backed up. And I have to say, this has blown my mind, because I never really thought about the idea of parallel universes or glitch in the Matrix style events. But this, to me, it has paranormal written all over it.
And, you know, I'll echo what you said there about the emotion in her voice when she was speaking. It was obviously something that had, you know, really, really stuck with her and really sort of not affected her perhaps negative way, but something that she carried with her, you know, on a day-to-day basis. It was definitely something that she's never going to forget, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And what's more interesting is that I am really hopeful that we are going to get her friend on as a guest too. I have been in contact with Alex, and she has kindly given me the email address of her friend. So it's just a case of as and when. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we can get her friend to come on and give her own independent recollection of what actually went down on that particular night. I'm so excited, I have to say.
I'll be honest, that would be a podcast that I'd love for us to get on, to get her friend as well. Would be brilliant. So, I mean, I've been racking my brain about, you know, if I'm going to take that story word for word for word, what kind of scientific areas I could put on that might explain some of them. And it's very, very difficult for me to come up with anything that's going to scientifically explain everything start to finish. But certainly aspects of it can be explained away by something called derealization. So derealization is a psychological thing which affects over 50% of people at some point in their life. So to say that somebody's experienced derealization is not saying, oh, you're crazy or you're nuts or this, you know, it's something that everybody gets. And there are various reasons for it, but here are some of the characteristic symptoms that you're going through a period of derealization. The first one is that you feel as if you're in some sort of dream or fog. The second one is that the world around you just seems fake. You know, you can't put your finger on it, but everything just seems a bit muted and lifeless and fake. A key one for me is the third one, and that's that objects look wrong. Objects do not look how they are supposed to look. So I'm thinking about the car key here, for example. You know, you're looking at something, even though it's physically not changed, you are absolutely 100% convinced that this object isn't the object you remember it being. There's also effect on how you hear sounds and time as well. Time, you'll either feel like time is speeding up, time is slowing down. Everything is incredibly surreal. Now, these periods of derealization can last hours, weeks, or months, and then disappear, and you can never have them again. Some people, about 1 in 50, just under 1 in 50, will have recurring bouts through their life. But that's the closest I can come to maybe explaining some of the things that were experienced in this story. And it doesn't really explain how both people at the time would be going through the same thing. I understand that. But that's the closest I've been able to find at any of my research, I think.
And just to add more to my part, because I do feel like I need to come back and in some way just kind of counter that with the evidence that Alex went to the house just a few doors away and asked the owners whether or not they'd replaced the Halloween toy that she saw in the garden that had been changed. And they said no. They said that they thought it was perhaps just one of their friends had perhaps done it as a running joke kind of thing because they'd left this in the garden. And I find that highly unlikely.